The darkness between galaxies had been quiet for a very long time. In that cold, empty space, massive shapes drifted like sleeping giants. They were ships, but not like any ship humans had ever built. These vessels were alive, their hulls breathing. Slowly as they moved through the void. Each one was bigger than a moon, covered in what looked like skin and bone mixed with metal. They had been sleeping for thousands of years, waiting for the right signal to wake them up. That signal came on. A Tuesday morning, Earth time. Deep space sensors picked up radio waves from human colonies, the electronic chatter of a growing civilization. The sleeping giants stirred. Eyes the size of buildings opened along their hulls. The HFY were awake. Commander Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the first alarm sounded. He was aboard the UES Defiant, a human warship patrolling the outer edge of known space. The coffee mug fell from his hands as he read the sensor report. Thousands of massive objects were moving toward human space. They were big, they were fast, and they were coming straight for the colonies. "Sir, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Mary Collins from the sensor station. Her face was pale as she pointed to the screen. The objects were not just moving randomly, they were in formation like a fleet heading to war. But these ships were unlike anything in human records. They pulsed with organic light, and their surfaces rippled like living tissue. Jake grabbed the communication device. "This is Commander Morrison to Fleet Command. We have unknown vessels approaching human space, requesting immediate backup." The response came quickly. Every available ship was being sent to investigate, but it would take days for reinforcements to arrive. The first contact happened at the Kepler mining colonies. Captain Lisa Hayes was commanding the UES Valiant when the alien ships arrived. She watched through her ship's cameras as the strange vessels approached the planet. They moved like sea creatures swimming through water, their hulls flexing and bending as they flew. "Open communication channels," Lisa ordered. "Let's try to talk to them." But the aliens did not respond to any human attempts at communication. They simply surrounded the planet and began to lower themselves toward the surface. What happened next would haunt Lisa for the rest of her life. The alien ships did not land on the planet. Instead, they opened like flowers, revealing massive mouths filled with metal teeth. They began to eat the planet itself. Buildings, vehicles, people, everything was pulled up into the ships and consumed. The aliens were not invaders. They were predators and humans were their prey. Lisa's ship fired every weapon it had. Plasma cannons, missiles, energy beams, everything hit the alien vessels. But the weapons had no effect. The alien ships seemed to absorb the attacks, their SULLs growing thicker and stronger. Then something terrible happened. The alien ships began to fire back, using weapons that looked exactly like human weapons. "They're copying our technology," Lisa said into her communication device. "They're learning from our attacks." Her final message was sent just before her ship was destroyed. "They're not just taking our worlds, they're eating them?" The news reached Earth within hours. Admiral Ben Carter, the head of the Sol Defense Fleet, called an emergency meeting. The room was filled with the best military minds in human space. They studied the reports from Kepler, trying to understand what they were facing. "These creatures are unlike anything we've seen before," said Dr. Helen Roberts, a scientist who specialized in alien technology. "They appear to be biological, but they use advanced technology. They can adapt to our weapons and copy them. Every time we attack, they become stronger." The situation got worse quickly. Within a week, 7 star systems had been completely consumed. The alien swarm, which humans had started calling the HFY, moved from system to system with terrifying efficiency. Each world they consumed made them stronger and smarter. Their ships grew larger, their weapons more powerful. Captain Steve Miller had been studying the alien attack patterns. He stood up in the meeting room and pointed to a star map. "Look at their movement," he said. "They're not random. They're following trade routes, communication lines, anything that connects our colonies. They're learning about our civilization and using that knowledge against us." The reports from the front lines were getting worse. The Kethver ships could now copy human shield technology, making them nearly impossible to destroy. They had learned to jam human communications, cutting off entire fleets from command. Most terrifying of all, they had begun to use human tactics against human forces. Admiral Carter made a difficult decision. We're pulling back all forces to the Storie Gate. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. We make our stand there. The Storie Gate was the last major defensive position between the alien swarm and Earth. If it fell, humanity would have nowhere left to run. The evacuation began immediately. Millions of people fled from the outer colonies, crowding into transport. Ships that carried them toward the inner worlds. But not everyone could be saved. Many colonies were too far away, and the Kethver were moving too fast. Entire worlds were left behind, their populations becoming food for the advancing swarm. Commander Jake Morrison watched the evacuation from his ship. Refugee vessels filled the space lanes, carrying everything humans could save from their abandoned worlds. Children pressed their faces against the windows, watching their home planets disappear behind them. Many of these people would never see their worlds again. The Kethver were not just destroying human civilization. They were consuming it, taking everything humans had built and making it part of themselves. Their ships now bristled with weapons that looked like human designs but were somehow more advanced. They had learned to speak human languages, sending terrifying messages to fleeing ships. Your technology is useful, the aliens broadcast in perfect English. Your worlds are nutritious. Your resistance is futile. The messages were spoken in voices that sounded human but were somehow wrong, as if the aliens were wearing human speech like a mask. As the swarm approached the Storie system, human scientists worked desperately to find a weakness. They studied every piece of data from the battles, looking for something that might stop the Kethver advance. But everything they tried failed. The aliens adapted too quickly, learned too fast. The Kethver had swept through entire galaxies before reaching human space. They had consumed countless civilizations, each one making them stronger and smarter. Humanity was just the latest prey in their endless feast. They had never been stopped, never been defeated, never even been seriously challenged, but they had never faced humans before. And humans had something that other species might not have had. They had the ability to make desperate choices, to sacrifice everything for a slim chance of victory. As the swarm approached the Storie Gate, humanity prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of their species. The Kethver ships gathered at the edge of the system, like a storm cloud made of living metal. Their hulls pulsed with the light of consumed worlds, and their weapons gleamed with stolen technology. They had eaten their way across the galaxy, and now they were ready to feast on humanity. But in the depths of space, a single human ship was preparing for a mission that would change everything. The UES Defiant was not the biggest or strongest ship in the human fleet, but she carried something that might be able to stop the swarm. Her crew knew they were probably going to die, but they also knew that someone had to try. The galaxy held its breath as two forces prepared to meet. One was ancient, powerful, and had never known defeat. The other was young, desperate, and had everything to lose. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Parker stood at the command center window, watching the last evacuation ships lift off from New Eden. The planet below was being stripped bare as millions of people fled toward the inner worlds. She had been stationed here for 3 years, watching this colony grow from a small outpost to a thriving world with cities and farms. Now it would all be abandoned to the Kethver. "Ma'am, the final transport is away," reported Sergeant Bill Davis. His voice was steady, but Amy could see the sadness in his eyes. They were soldiers trained to protect these people, and now all they could do was run. Amy nodded and turned away from the window. "Signal all remaining personnel. We're pulling out in 30 minutes. She looked at the tactical display showing the approaching alien swarm. The Kethver ships were still 2 days away, but everyone knew what would happen when they arrived. New Eden would be consumed, just like all the other worlds. The evacuation was happening across dozens of star systems. Entire civilizations were being packed into cargo ships and sent toward the core worlds. But there was not enough room for everyone, and there was not enough time? The Kethver were moving faster than anyone had predicted. Captain Steve Miller sat in his office on Luna Command, studying the latest battle reports. The situation was getting worse with each passing hour. The Kethver were not just learning human technology anymore. They were improving it. Their ships now had shields that were better than anything humans had built. Their weapons were more powerful and more accurate. "Look at this," Steve said to his assistant, showing him a computer screen. 3 months ago, Kethver ships could barely hit a moving target. Now they're destroying our fastest fighters with single shots. The alien learning curve was terrifying. What had taken humans decades to develop, the Kethver could master in days. The worst part was that every battle made the situation worse. Each time human forces engaged the aliens, more technology was captured and copied. The Kethver ships that had once been slow and clumsy now moved with the grace of human fighters. They used human tactics against human forces, but they did it better because they never got tired or made mistakes. Dr. Helen Roberts worked day and night in her laboratory deep below the surface of the moon. She was humanity's best hope for finding a weapon that could stop the Kethver. Her team had been studying alien technology samples, trying to find some weakness they could exploit. "The problem is their adaptability," Helen explained to Admiral Carter during one of their daily briefings. "They're not just copying our technology. They're understanding it at a fundamental level and then making it better. It's like they have millions of scientists working on each problem simultaneously." Helen's current project was something called the Prometheus device. It was based on a theory that the Kethver's biological technology might be vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies, but the device was still months away from completion, and the alien swarm was only weeks away from reaching the core worlds. President Charles Baker called an emergency session of the Terran Senate. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from every human world, their faces grim as they listened to the latest reports. The outer colonies were gone. The middle colonies were being evacuated. Soon the Kethver would reach the heart of human civilization. "We have one choice," Baker said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We implement the Last Stand protocol. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. We make our final stand at the Centauri gate." The Last Stand protocol was humanity's most desperate plan. It meant abandoning the outer defenses and concentrating every available resource at the last major defensive position before Earth. It was a gamble that could save humanity or doom it completely. The protocol required painful choices. Worlds that might have been defended were left unprotected. Military resources were pulled back from systems that still had millions of civilians. The plan was to create a defensive force so powerful that even the Kethver could not break through. Commander Alice Stone was one of the tactical officers planning the defense. She worked with teams of strategists, trying to figure out how to stop an enemy that had never been defeated. The challenge was enormous. The Kethver had consumed hundreds of civilizations across multiple galaxies. They had faced every kind of weapon and defense imaginable. "We need to think differently," Alice said during one planning session. "Every other species probably tried to fight them with conventional tactics. We need to do something unexpected." She had been studying Kethver behavior patterns, looking for any weakness that could be exploited. The alien swarm was not random in its movements. They followed patterns like a complex dance that had been perfected over millions of years. They surrounded their targets, consumed them completely, and then moved on to the next. It was efficient and unstoppable, but Alice wondered if that efficiency might also be a weakness. The evacuation continued as the defensive preparations intensified. Refugee ships filled the space lanes, carrying everything humans could save from their abandoned worlds. Families were separated as children were sent to safety while parents stayed behind to help with the evacuation. Many people would never see their loved ones again. Captain Ryan Brooks received his orders while his ship was docked at a military station. The UES Defiant was to report to a classified facility for special modifications. He was not told what. The modifications were for, only that his ship had been selected for a critical mission. "Why us?" asked Commander Alice Stone, who served as the ship's tactical officer. The Defiant was a good ship, but there were bigger and more powerful vessels in the fleet. She could not understand why they had been chosen for something so important. "I don't know," Ryan replied, "but I have a feeling we're going to find out soon enough." He had been in the military long enough to recognize a suicide mission when he saw one. The secrecy, the special modifications, the timing, everything pointed to a desperate plan that would probably get them all killed. The Kethfer continued their relentless advance. Each world they consumed made them stronger and smarter. Their ships now bristled with weapons that combined human technology with alien improvements. They had learned to use human communication systems to send terrifying messages to the fleeing populations. "Your resistance amuses us," the aliens broadcast in perfect human languages. "Your technology is primitive, but useful. Your worlds are nutritious. We will consume everything you have built and make it part of ourselves." The messages were delivered in voices that sounded human but were somehow wrong, as if the aliens were imitating something they did not truly understand. The Damascus system fell in less than 2 days. 3 heavily defended worlds were stripped, bare as the human defenders watched helplessly. The Kethfer had learned to coordinate their attacks perfectly, hitting multiple targets simultaneously while adapting to each defensive strategy in real time. News of the Damascus defeat reached Earth within hours. The Terran Senate emergency session was brief. There was no time for debate or discussion. President Baker signed the Last Stand Protocol into law, and the orders went out immediately to every human. Military unit. Every available ship was recalled to the Centauri Gate. Massive defensive platforms were towed into position. Weapon systems that had been under development for years were rushed into service. Humanity was betting everything on one final battle. The Centauri Gate was humanity's last major defensive position. It was a natural choke point where the alien swarm would have to pass through a relatively narrow area of space. If the humans could hold them there, they might have a chance. If the gate fell, the path to Earth would be open. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez worked around the clock to prepare the Defiant for her secret mission. He installed new reactor systems that pushed the ship's power output beyond safe limits. He modified the shields to emit specific frequencies that might disrupt alien technology. Most importantly, he installed a dead man switch that would detonate the ship's antimatter reserves if the mission failed. The modifications were dangerous and probably illegal under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. Humanity was facing extinction, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Tony knew that his modifications would probably kill everyone on the ship, but he also knew that someone had to try. As the Kethfer swarm approached the Centauri system, both sides prepared for the battle that would decide humanity's fate. The aliens had never been stopped, never been defeated, never even been seriously challenged. But they had never faced a species desperate enough to risk everything on a single throw of the dice. The darkness between the stars seemed to hold its breath as the two forces prepared to meet. One was ancient, powerful, and confident in its inevitable victory. The other was young, desperate, and had nothing left to lose. The stage was set for humanity's last stand. The UES Defiant was not the biggest warship in the human fleet. She was not the fastest or the strongest either. Compared to the massive dreadnoughts gathering at the Centauri Gate, she was just another heavy cruiser with a crew of 300 people. But Captain Ryan Brooks knew his ship had been chosen for something special when the sealed orders arrived. "Take us to coordinates 779, Ryan told his navigation officer. The coordinates led to a secret military facility, hidden in an asteroid field. As they approached, Ryan could see that the facility was much larger than it appeared from the outside. Entire sections of the asteroid had been hollowed out and converted into shipyards and laboratories. Commander Alice Stone stood beside Ryan on the bridge, watching as their ship was guided into a massive docking bay. Through the viewports, she could see technicians and engineers waiting for their arrival. Equipment that she did not recognize was being wheeled toward the docking clamps. "Sir, what exactly are we doing here?" Alice asked. She had been Ryan's tactical officer for 2 years, and she had never seen him look so serious. The entire crew was nervous because no one had explained what their mission would be. "I wish I knew," Ryan replied. "All I know is that we're about to become part of something that could change the war." He had read the classified briefing, but even that had not explained everything. The mission was so secret that most of the details were being kept from the crew until the last possible. And Dr. Helen Roberts was waiting for them in the facility's main laboratory. She looked tired, as if she had not slept in days. Behind her were machines and devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a military facility. "Captain Brooks," Helen said, shaking Ryan's hand. "Thank you for volunteering for this mission." She led them through the laboratory, explaining what they were going to do. "We're going to modify your ship in ways that have never been tried before. It's dangerous, and it might not work, but it's the only chance we have." The modifications would take 3 days to complete. During that time, Ryan learned more about what they were facing. The HFY were not just another alien species. They were a force that had consumed entire galaxies, learning and adapting from every civilization they encountered. Humanity was just the latest in a long line of species that had tried to stop them. Every other species tried to fight them with conventional weapons, Helen explained. They built bigger guns, stronger shields, faster ships, but the HFY just adapted and became stronger. "We need to try something completely different." Alice spent her time studying the new tactical systems that were being installed on the Defiant. The ship's weapons were being modified to emit specific frequencies that might disrupt HFY technology. But the real key to the mission was something much more dangerous. "We're going to use their own learning ability against them," Alice said to the other officers during a briefing. "The HFY adapt to everything they encounter. But what if we could make them adapt to something that would hurt them?" The plan was complex and required perfect timing. The Defiant would have to penetrate deep into the HFY swarm and position herself at the exact center of their formation. Then they would activate a device that would send out signals designed to confuse and overwhelm the aliens. Adaptive Systems, Chief Engineer Tony Martinez, was working with the facility's technical team to install the new reactor systems. The modifications were pushing the ship's power output far beyond safe limits. The reactor would probably explode after a few hours of operation, but that was part of the plan. "Sir, these modifications are going to kill us," Tony said to Ryan during one of their meetings. "The reactor will hold together for maybe 6 hours before it goes critical. After that, we're all dead," Ryan nodded grimly. "I know. But if we don't try this, everyone in human space will be dead anyway." He had volunteered his crew for a suicide mission, but it was a chance to save billions of lives. Sometimes soldiers had to make that kind of choice. The crew of the Defiant slowly learned about their mission as the modifications continued. Some of them were afraid, but none of them asked to be transferred to another ship. They had all joined the military to protect humanity, and now they had a chance to do exactly that. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson was the ship's communications officer. She had been working with the technical team to install new communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with the main fleet, even while deep inside the HFY swarm. But she also knew that the equipment had another purpose. "If we don't make it back," Sarah said to Ryan, "at least we'll be able to tell the fleet what happened. Maybe they can learn from our success or failure." She was preparing to send a final message to Earth, something that would let people know that her crew had not given up without a fight. The HFY continued their advance while the Defiant was being modified. More star systems fell, and the alien swarm grew stronger with each victory. Their ships now looked like a mixture of organic tissue and human technology, as if they were wearing the bones of their victims. Reports from the front lines showed that the aliens were preparing for something big. Their ships were gathering in massive formations, and they were building structures that human scientists did not understand. It looked like they were preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm all of humanity's defenses. Admiral Carter visited the secret facility on the second day of modifications. He looked tired and worried as he spoke with Ryan and Helen about the mission. The main fleet was in position at the Centauri gate, but everyone knew it would not be enough to stop the Kethver. "This is our last chance," Carter said. "If your mission fails, the gate will fall within days. After that, Earth will be defenseless." He shook hands with each member of the Defiant's crew, knowing that he would probably never see them again. The modifications were completed on schedule, but the ship looked very different than before. New equipment covered every surface, and strange lights pulsed through the corridors. The reactor hummed with dangerous energy, and the shields flickered with colors that hurt to look at. "She's ready," Tony reported to Ryan. "The reactor is stable for now, but once we activate the new systems, we'll have maybe 6 hours before everything falls apart." He had done his best to make the modifications as safe as possible, but there were limits to what could be done. The Defiant left the secret facility and began her journey toward the Kethver swarm. As they traveled, Ryan called his crew together for a final briefing. He explained the mission in detail, making sure everyone understood what they were about to do. "We're going to fly into the heart of the enemy formation," Ryan said. "We're going to activate a device that might stop them, or it might just make them angry. Either way, we're probably not coming back." He looked at each of his crew members. "Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship can do so now. I won't think less of you." No one moved. Lieutenant Paul Davis, the ship's science officer, stood up and spoke for the entire crew. "Sir, we've been together for 2 years. We've faced pirates, raiders, and alien threats. We're not going to abandon you now." The others nodded in agreement. Sarah sent her final message to Earth as the Defiant approached the edge of Kethver space. "To anyone who receives this transmission, know that we did not go quietly into the dark. We stood our ground and fought for every human life. If we succeed, remember that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to." The Arcturus system came into view, and the crew of the Defiant saw the true horror of what they were facing. The Kethver had consumed 3 planets and were building something massive in the space where the worlds used to be. It was part machine and part living organism, pulsing with lights that seemed to communicate across the entire swarm. "That's our target," Alice said, pointing to the massive structure. "According to our intelligence, that's the central coordination hub for the entire swarm. If we can disrupt it, we might be able to stop their advance." The Defiant began her final approach, using stealth systems to avoid detection. The crew knew that they were flying into almost certain death, but they also knew that they were humanity's last hope. Behind them, the main fleet waited at the Centauri gate. Ahead of them, the Kethver swarm prepared for its final assault on human civilization. The stage was set for the most desperate gamble in human history. One small ship against an enemy that had never been defeated. The odds were impossible, but sometimes impossible odds were exactly what humans needed to do their best work. The Arcturus system looked like a nightmare made real. Where 3 planets had once orbited a yellow star, there was now only twisted metal and organic matter floating in space. The Kethver had consumed everything solid in the system and were using the material to build something that defied human understanding. Captain Ryan Brooks stared at the main screen in disbelief. The structure the aliens were building was larger than most moons, but it was alive. Veins of light pulsed across its surface like blood flowing through arteries. Sections of it moved and shifted like a breathing creature, and embedded in its hull were pieces of human starships, their metal torn and twisted into new shapes. "My God," whispered Commander Alice Stone. "They're wearing our ships like jewelry." She could see the remains of at least a dozen human vessels built into the alien structure. The ships had been partially digested, their hulls merged with organic tissue to create something that was neither machine nor living creature. The Defiant was running silent. using every stealth system the ship possessed to avoid detection. They had entered the outer edge of the HFY formation 3 hours ago, moving slowly through the debris fields that surrounded the alien construction. So far they had not been spotted, but Ryan knew their luck would not last forever. Lieutenant. Commander Paul Davis was monitoring the alien bio readings from his station. The data he was collecting made no sense according to human understanding of biology. The HFY ships were not just alive, they were connected to each other through some kind of network that spanned the entire swarm. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildups across the entire formation," Paul reported. "It looks like they're preparing for something big. The central structure is drawing power from every ship in the swarm." The readings suggested that the aliens were about to launch an attack that would dwarf anything they had done before. Alice studied her tactical displays, looking for the best route to their target. The HFY formation was not random. The alien ships were positioned in a complex pattern that seemed to follow mathematical principles. Each ship was exactly where it needed to be to support the massive structure at the center. "They don't expect anyone to attack from the inside," Alice said to Ryan. "Look at their defensive positions. All their weapons are pointed outward, toward the edge of the system. They're not watching for threats coming from within their own formation." It was the only weakness she could find in their defenses. The plan required the Defiant to reach the exact center of the alien formation where the massive structure was located. From there, they would activate Dr. Roberts' device and hope it could disrupt the HFY's biological network. But first, they had to get there without being detected. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez was monitoring the ship's modified reactor from the engine room. The new systems were working, but they were pushing every component beyond its design limits. He could feel the ship vibrating as the reactor struggled to contain the massive energies flowing through it. "Captain, we're running hot down here," Tony reported over the communication system. "The reactor is stable for now, but these modifications are not meant to last. We've got maybe 3 hours before something critical fails." He was doing his best to keep the ship together, but the modifications were too extreme. The Defiant moved deeper into the swarm, passing between alien ships that were each the size of cities. The crew watched in fascination and horror as they got their first close look at HFY technology. The ships were not built, they were grown. Their hulls were made of living tissue that could heal itself when damaged. Their weapons were organic, structures that looked like the stinger of a giant insect. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson was recording everything they saw for transmission back to Earth if the mission failed. At least the human fleet would have detailed information about HFY technology. She focused her cameras on the alien ships, trying to understand how they worked. "The ships are talking to each other," Sarah reported. "I'm picking up some kind of biological communication network. It's like they're all part of one giant organism." The discovery explained how the HFY could coordinate their attacks so perfectly. They were not individual ships fighting together. They were organs of a single massive creature. The central structure grew larger as they approached, revealing details that were even more disturbing. The thing was not just alive, it was intelligent. Massive eyes dotted its surface, each one larger than the Defiant's entire hull. And at the very center was something that looked like a brain, pulsing with energy that made the space around it shimmer. "That's it," Alice said, pointing to the brain-like structure. "That's the coordination center for the entire swarm. If we can disrupt that, we might be able to stop them." The brain was protected by layers of organic armor and weapon systems, but it was also the most vulnerable part of the entire alien network. Paul's sensors detected movement within the central structure. New ships were being born, growing from the organic walls like fruit on a tree. The HFY were literally breeding new vessels, using the material they had consumed from human worlds. Each new ship was perfectly adapted for its intended purpose. "Sir, they're building an invasion fleet," Paul reported. "Those new ships are designed for attacking planetary surfaces. They're preparing to consume the core worlds." The aliens were not just planning to defeat humanity's military. They were planning to eat every human world in existence. The Defiant was now less than 1,000 kilometers from the central structure. At this distance, they could see individual alien creatures moving across the surface of the brain. The creatures were working on something, making modifications to the structure that would increase its power. Time was running out. Ryan made the decision to move to the final phase of their mission. "All stop," he ordered. "This is as close as we're going to get without being detected." They were now positioned exactly where Dr. Roberts had calculated they needed to be. The device would have maximum effect from this location. Alice began the activation sequence for the special equipment. The ship's entire power grid was redirected to the new systems, causing lights to dim throughout the vessel. The modified shields began to emit frequencies that had never been tested in combat. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the plan would work. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The nearest Kethver ships began to convulse as the disruptive frequencies hit their biological systems. Their hulls rippled and twisted as their adaptive mechanisms tried to cope with the contradictory signals flooding their networks. Some ships actually turned and attacked their neighbors, unable to distinguish friend from enemy, but the victory was short-lived. The central brain structure began to pulse with increasing intensity, sending out new signals that helped the alien ships adapt to the disruption. Within minutes, the Kethver were beginning to filter out the harmful frequencies. Worse, they were learning to use those frequencies as weapons against the Defiant. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Paul reported. "The brain is coordinating their response. It's like they have millions of scientists working on the problem simultaneously." The alien intelligence was beyond anything humans had imagined. It could analyze and solve problems in real time, while controlling thousands of ships. New Kethver vessels began to emerge from the central structure, their hulls already adapted to resist the Defiant's disruption signals. These ships were different from the others, sleeker and more aggressive. They moved with purpose toward the human vessel, their weapons charging for attack. "We've been detected," Alice announced. "Enemy ships closing on our position." The stealth systems that had hidden them were useless now. The aliens knew exactly where they were and were moving to destroy them. The first phase of the mission had failed, but Ryan was not ready to give up. Tony's voice came over the communication system, strained with effort. "Captain, the reactor is approaching critical. We've got maybe 30 minutes before containment fails." The ship was dying around them, but they still had one card left to play. Ryan looked at his crew, seeing determination in their faces despite the hopeless situation. They had come this far, and they were not going to quit now. The fate of humanity depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The Defiant was just one small ship against an enemy that had consumed galaxies, but sometimes one ship was enough to change history. The Kethver ships moved toward the Defiant like sharks sensing blood in the water. Captain Ryan Brooks watched them approach on his tactical screen, counting at least 20 vessels closing on their position. Each alien ship was larger than his cruiser, and their weapons were already charging for attack. "Sir, we need to move," Commander Alice Stone said urgently. "If we stay here, they'll tear us apart." But Ryan shook his head. Moving would ruin their position at the center of the alien formation. This was where Dr. Roberts had calculated they needed to be for the final phase of the mission. "We hold position," Ryan ordered. "Tony, how much time do we have on the reactor?" The chief engineer's voice came back strained with effort. The ship was shaking now as the modified systems pushed every component beyond its limits. 20 minutes. "Maybe less," Tony Martinez replied from the engine room. "The containment field is fluctuating. When it goes, we're all going with it." The reactor that powered their ship was about to become the biggest bomb in human space. Lieutenant Commander Paul Davis was still monitoring the alien network from his science station. The massive brain structure at the center of the swarm was working furiously, sending out new signals to coordinate the approaching ships. But Paul noticed something interesting in the data patterns. "Captain, the central brain is using a lot of power to control all these ships," Paul reported. "It's like a computer trying to run too many programs at once. If we could overload it somehow, the whole network might collapse." The alien intelligence was powerful, but it had limits just like any system. Alice looked at her tactical display, studying the approaching enemy ships. They were moving in perfect coordination, following attack patterns that would destroy the Defiant efficiently. But their perfect coordination might also be their weakness. I have an idea, Alice said to Ryan. What if we don't try to fight them? What if we try to confuse them instead? She began working on her console, preparing to implement a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The first Kethver ship opened fire, sending a beam of energy that barely missed the Defiant's hull. The alien weapons were powerful, enough to cut through their shields in seconds. But instead of returning fire, Alice activated a new program she had been working on. The Defiant's modified communication system began broadcasting on every frequency the aliens used for coordination. But instead of trying to jam their signals, Alice was sending fake commands that looked like they came from the central brain. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The approaching Kethver ship suddenly stopped their attack and began turning toward each other. Their perfect coordination collapsed as they received contradictory orders from what they thought was their command center. Some ships tried to attack the Defiant while others tried to protect it. The alien formation dissolved into confusion. It's working, Paul said excitedly. The fake signals are overloading their network. The central brain can't filter them out fast enough. The massive alien intelligence was struggling to maintain control as thousands of false commands flooded its communication channels, but the victory was temporary. The central brain began to adapt, learning to identify and ignore the fake signals. Within minutes, the Kethver ships were beginning to regain their coordination. New ships were emerging from the central structure, their communication systems already modified to resist human interference. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson was recording everything that happened, preparing to transmit their final report to Earth. She knew that even if they failed, the information they had gathered might help the main fleet find a way to stop the aliens. "This is Lieutenant Johnson aboard the UES Defiant," she said into her communication device. "We have penetrated the center of the Kethver formation. The aliens are more intelligent than we thought, but they can be confused and disrupted. If anyone receives this message, tell them that humans do not surrender." Ryan made the hardest decision of his life. The first phase of their mission had partially succeeded, but it was not enough to stop the alien swarm permanently. They had one option left, and it would kill everyone on his ship. "All hands, this is the captain," Ryan announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going to implement the final protocol. Everyone has 30 seconds to send personal messages to your families." He watched his crew as they quickly recorded farewell messages that might never reach their destinations. The final protocol was Dr. Roberts' most desperate plan. Instead of trying to disrupt the alien network with electromagnetic signals, they would overload the central brain with pure information. The Defiance reactor would be detonated in a specific way that would create a massive data pulse, feeding the alien intelligence more information than it could process. Tony began the final shutdown sequence in the engine room. He had spent 3 days modifying the reactor for this moment, turning it into a weapon that could destroy an entire star system. His hands were steady as he entered the activation codes, knowing that he was about to die for his species. "Reactor overload initiated," Tony reported. "We have 5 minutes until detonation." The ship began to shake violently as the containment field started to collapse. "Energy readings spiked beyond anything the instruments could measure," Alice continued. "To broadcast fake signals to the alien network, trying to keep them confused until the very end." The Kethver ships were closing in again, their weapons charging for a final attack. But they were too late to stop what was about to happen. Paul watched his instruments as the alien brain structure began to pulse with increasing intensity. It was trying to coordinate a response to the human ship, but the fake signals were creating too much chaos in its network. The massive intelligence was approaching overload. "The central brain is struggling," Paul reported. "It's trying to process too much information at once. When the reactor goes, the information pulse might be enough to cause a complete system failure." The plan was working, but they would never know if it succeeded. Ryan looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had volunteered for a suicide mission to save their species. They were not heroes in the traditional sense, just ordinary humans doing an extraordinary thing. In a few minutes, they would all be dead, but their sacrifice might save billions of lives. The reactor reached critical mass with 2 minutes to spare. The Defiant was now a flying bomb that could not be stopped or controlled. The ship's hull began to glow as massive energies built up in the engine room. Emergency systems screamed warnings that no one could hear over the noise. The Kethver ships finally reached firing range and opened up with everything they had. Energy beams and organic projectiles slammed into the Defiant's hull, but it was too late. The reactor containment field collapsed, and the ship became a miniature star. For exactly 3 seconds, the explosion was visible from the edge of the star system. When the light faded, the massive alien structure was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of debris. The information pulse from the reactor had overloaded the central brain, causing a cascade failure that spread through the entire Kethver network. Without their central coordination, the alien ships began to attack each other. Their perfect unity collapsed into chaos as they lost the ability to distinguish friend from enemy. Ships that had worked together for millions of years suddenly became mortal enemies. The few Kethver vessels that retained some function began to retreat toward the edge of the galaxy. The swarm that had consumed countless civilizations was broken, scattered, and leaderless. They would return to their long sleep in the void between galaxies, but they would remember the small human ship that had stood in their way. News of the victory reached Earth within hours. The alien threat was over, and humanity had survived. The Centauri gate defenses had held until the Kethver retreat began. Billions of people owed their lives to the crew of one small ship that had refused to surrender. The Defiant was gone, but her memory lived on. She became a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they faced impossible odds. Children learned her story in school, and her name was given to the first ship built after the war. The galaxy would remember that sometimes the smallest spark could light the greatest fire. In the debris field where the alien structure had been, rescue ships found a few human survivors in escape pods. They had been prisoners of the Kethver, people from worlds that had been consumed months earlier. Their rescue was the first good news humanity had received in a very long time. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven that even the most overwhelming force could be stopped by courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The Kethver had swept through countless worlds, but they had learned something important about the human species. Humans do not surrender. They do not give up. And when they are pushed to the very edge of extinction, they find ways to push back that no one expects. The galaxy was a safer place because one ship and her crew had decided to stand their ground.